Militant vegans are insane and should be regarded as such and treated just like any other progressive, with contempt and regarded as the enemy of normal people. In other news, Denmark has put out the Hug a Terrorist program, and I wish I were joking when announcing this. Meanwhile, the industrial baby-killing machine, Planned Parenthood, thinks that the babies that do manage to avoid being killed by them should be castrated. Well, they don't outright say that, but they do encourage parents to teach kids how girls can have penises and how trannyism is something cool and to aspire to. In other news, France is full of jihadis. Trannyism is still a mental disorder. A jihadi German will be executed in Iraq, hopefully. And the president of Cambridge University Student Union's Black and Minority Ethnic Campaign has finally had some consequences inflicted upon him for his disdainful, sexist and racist views. And of course, he now complains, and we will be drinking his tears. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 11 of Periodic Insanity. Now, I promised I'll do this episode before I leave to Georgia, but this one might end up published while I'm already on the road. Well, close enough. Preparing the tour hasn't been an easy business, so with that said, let us begin. The first piece of news comes from Fox News. Vegans bully California butcher shop into hanging animal rights sign. And goes like this, quote, "Vegan extremists have bullied the mom-and-pop butcher shop in California's most liberal city into hanging an animal rights sign in the window that the shop owner says it amounts to ethical extortion. The local butcher shop of Berkeley had been targeted for months by nearly naked protesters dripping in fake blood. The protests had been organized by the vegan group Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE, which said they would continue if the shop owners Monica and Aaron Rocchino don't cave in to their demands. To be threatened and forced to abide by their beliefs just makes me sad," Monica Rocchino told The Guardian Wednesday. "Their tactics are really extremist. This is ethical extortion." The paper quoted Matt Johnson, a Direct Action Everywhere organizer, as saying that he and his group challenge places that market their business as humane to animals. "People are paying a lot more for these dead animals," he told the paper. "They have some notion that these animals are being treated well." The group contends that there is no ethical way to kill animals for food and are campaigning to make Berkeley the first city free of violence toward animals, meaning banning the sale of meat, The Guardian reported. The group initially demanded that the Rocchinos turn their shop into a vegan butcher that did not sell meat in exchange for ending the protests. The Rocchinos rejected that demand. The sign says killing animals is violent and unjust, no matter how it's done. The Washington Post reported that Mimi Stein of Certified Humane, an organization that certifies farms with the highest standards of painless slaughter, had denounced Direct Action Everywhere's actions. DXE is attempting to undermine consumer confidence in products which are in fact ethically produced, and businesses working in good faith to reinvigorate a very desirable traditional business model, Stein told the paper in an email. A shame should be on DXE. In recent weeks, neighborhood residents held protests in support of the local butcher shop, not necessarily because they were customers, but because they were tired of the disruption, Monica Rocchino told the San Francisco Chronicle. She told the paper that so far, business has not been affected by the sign. "If anything, customers say this is ridiculous and we're sorry that you're being extorted that way. It's not going to change anyone's mind," she said. "They've put a lot of thought into where they're getting their meat." Alright, so this is a case where shooting those assholes on sight is morally valid. In a normal world, that is to say, not Berkeley, California, you would be removed for obstruction and likely eventually arrested for blackmail. but not in Berkeley, where the radical tactics of helicopterables are okay, while being a normal human being is not okay. Now, I believe in everyone's freedom to eat whatever they damn please, but I retain my membership with PETA, that is, people eating tasty animals. And while I'm an atheist, I take it to heart that there is room for all God's creatures right next to my mashed potatoes. With that said, I don't want to force the vegetarians to eat meat. Heck, why would I? Their existence means more meat for me. Militant vegans and vegetarians, on the other hand, should be given free helicopter rides. And I'm not convinced. I'm joking. This whole notion of animal rights is helicopterable in and of itself. Animals are property, just like any other property, and that means the owner gets to dispose of his own property however he damn pleases. If there's one thing I agree with Muslims, it's on the halal meat issue. It's not, nor should it ever be, the business of the state to tell anyone how he should cook on his property or how he should cook his property. Now, when animals will pay taxes, maybe I'll care. But until then, we built this civilization for us and in order to serve us as humans. And this whole animal rights bullshit only exists in tiny corners of the first world, not even the entirety of the first world. You don't see many vegan militants in Somalia or Eritrea or North Korea for that matter. You don't see, if it were up to these idiots, millions of people should just die off from starvation because they are not as hip as they are, nor as rich as they are, to afford to spend thousands of dollars on artificial vitamins to supplement what they would have normally gotten from meat. Now, as for the business owners, they should have never caved in. What they should have done instead is to get a bodyguard, by stealth if necessary, and beat the crap out of these cunts. A friend of mine was joking that why don't they do this in the Intermarium, preferably in Slovakia or northwest of Romania in the Maramuresh area. For those who don't know, the people in Maramuresh area successfully resisted communist collectivization, and it is still unknown to this very day how many communists perished in various accidents in those mountains trying to enforce the commie policy. But they don't have to go that far. Why don't these direct action freaks try this in Louisiana or Tennessee? Or Indiana, why not? This shows you how little they believe in their cause and what a gigantic pile of pussies they indeed are. Conservatives have drove their anti-tranny buses in leftist bubbles, but lefties in return seem to be very reluctant to bring their protests in majority normal areas. Gee, I wonder why. Alright, let's go to the next story. In fact, the next batch of stories, all of them about the religion of peace. So, first from Denmark. Via Fox News Insider, Hug a Terrorist program aims to stop spread of extremism in Denmark. I can't believe I'm reading this. Quote, police in Denmark have set up a controversial new program to stop the spread of radicalization and terror attacks. In Aarhus, Denmark's second largest city, authorities are using a method referred to by some as the Hug a Terrorist or Hug a Jihadi model of de-radicalization. They're trying to change the minds of potential Islamic extremists by supporting them and offering them kindness rather than treating them as outcasts and criminals. Dateline reporter Evan Williams spoke with the man using the alias Jamal, who said he was so disenfranchised and angry with society he was considering leaving Denmark and becoming a terrorist. In my mind, I was like, they treated me as a terrorist, so if they want a terrorist, they'll get one, he said. When he began speaking with someone from the Hug a Jihadi program, he began to open up about the unique difficulties of being a Muslim in Denmark. Wah, smirk. Williams said that's when Jamal began to reconsider his views. All it took was someone to reach out and offer empathy and understanding, Williams wrote. Now, sadly, this is not a joke. This is, in fact, representative of how naive most authorities in Scandinavia actually are. Oh, he opened up about the difficulties of being a Muslim in Denmark. Who cares? First of all, you shouldn't be a Muslim in Denmark. There's a reason there's a cross on Denmark's flag. And please spare me with my tolerance argument. Islam is a supremacist, command and control totalitarian ideology. It is the mortal enemy of the Judeo-Christian civilization, and indeed, any civilization anywhere. Why would any normal human being give a toss about their difficulties of being a Muslim in Denmark? Send them all back. Now I'll start giving a damn when I'll see Muslim-majority countries setting up programs to help Christians dealing with the unique difficulties in being a normal human in a country driven by a totalitarian, supremacist, expansionist, and savage ideology. Until then, I have to admit that I don't care at all about any Muslim anywhere that feels difficulties. But still, here's a tip. Take advice from Tartar Muslims who've been living in peace in the Intermarium for over 3 centuries now, or perhaps from Albanians, but not the Kosovars, no, the actual Albanians, or anyone following schools of thought around the Hanafi area. I'm not even joking. If all Muslims would be like the Albanians in Albania, there would be no Islamophobia. Heck, in Albania they called the police on a TV crew that was videotaping a clip, and from a secure distance some costumes looked like ISIS, even though they had nothing to do with that. When I'll see the majority of Muslims being at least as cautious as Albanians are to radicalization, then I'll care. But not a second sooner. Boo-hoo, you face difficulties, you need a hug. Give me a freaking break. Alright, next story. Coming from The Sun, facing death, schoolgirl 16 who fled Germany to join ISIS faces execution in Iraq as dramatic video shows her being dragged from jihadi lair in Mosul. And goes like this, quote, "A schoolgirl who fled Germany to join ISIS faces execution after dramatic video footage emerged showing her being dragged from an ISIS lair in Mosul. Linda Wenzel, 16, looks filthy, dazed and wounded as her capture is filmed by an Iraqi soldier from the Islamic State stronghold. Footage aired on the German newspaper Bild's website for the first time today shows the girl, dubbed the Belle of Mosul, screaming as she is put through the walk of shame. In the video, 2 men are seen leading Linda away as she winces in pain from a wound. Linda, who converted to Islam as a 15-year-old schoolgirl in her hometown in Pulschnitz in eastern Germany last year, ran away from home to join the fanatics after being groomed online by an ISIS recruiter. Germany is negotiating with the Iraqi authorities to get her back to Germany, where she faces charges of belonging and supporting a terrorist organization. Wenzel could reportedly face trial for her actions. As it emerged, she was found with baby boy in her bomb-ravaged fortress. It is unclear exactly what role she performed for the group in Mosul, but if she fought and killed for it, she could be staring at a long jail term. One German magazine, citing Iraqi security sources, said she and the 4 German women she was found with in the rubble of Mosul last month worked to the Islamic State's morals police, responsible for women adhering to strict dress codes. Those who did not obey faced a whipping or worse. Whether Linda Wenzel was involved in brutalizing anyone is also unclear. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is a very clear-cut case. Hang her up high. Now, I love it that when it's a man, it's a monster or whatever, or jihadi John. But when it's a jihadi woman, suddenly we're supposed to give a shit. Sorry, no shits to be given here. She should be tried by the Iraqi authorities under Iraqi law, which is very clear. Punishment for this is hanging up high. Now, I hope the trial will be speedy and the execution also scheduled this year. And I mean this as seriously as I can. Boys as young as 12 were drafted in World War II by Germany, and many of them faced execution for treason. No problem there. Yet for some reason, we're supposed to believe this particular traitor is more valuable. No, she's not. Also, this language of, oh, but she's just a schoolgirl. No, I'm sorry. She's not. At 15, you can legally have sex, get married, work, pay taxes, and be criminally responsible for your deeds. This is true both in Germany and in Iraq. So for all intents and purposes, she is legally an adult who voluntarily chose to fraternize with the enemy of civilization. So she is not our peer. No, she's the enemy. And at the end of a war like this, the enemy is put to trial for war crimes and swiftly executed. That's how real world works. She wasn't a schoolgirl when enforcing Sharia law upon innocent people. Boys as young as 8 were executed in the Islamic State for the crime of watching a football match, likely snitched out by various schoolgirls, just like this one. So no, I'm sorry, but she renounced her human rights a long time ago. Human rights should only apply, to humans and not to savages. Next story. I was thinking in the realm of jihadi women. Coming from France 24, Pakistani Taliban launch women's magazine for would-be jihadis. And goes like this, quote, "The Pakistani Taliban has launched a women's magazine aimed at encouraging women to take up arms and practice jihad. Titled Sunati Kaula, which translates as The Way of Kaula, in reference to a 7th century female Muslim poetess who was close to the Prophet Muhammad, the front cover of its inaugural issue features a woman veiled from head to toe. We want to provoke women of Islam to come forward and join the ranks of the Mujahideen," reads an opening editorial. "Organize secret gatherings at home and invite like-minded jihadi sisters," the editorial continues. "Distribute literature reflecting on the obligation of jihad, arrange physical training classes for sisters, learn how to operate simple weapons, learn the use of grenades." The digitally distributed 45-page magazine has been published by Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan (TTP), also known as the Pakistani Taliban, the most dangerous radical Islamist group operating in Pakistan. Target readership: educated teens and mothers. Written in English, Sunati Kaula is targeted at educated women. It features an interview with the wife of TTP chief Fazlullah Khorasani, who married him at 14, where she makes the case for child marriage. I ask you, why now everywhere there is a hue and cry about underage marriages? We have to understand that mature boys and girls, if left unmarried for too long, can become a source of moral destruction of the society, she says. The article has been ridiculed by Lahore-based social activist and blogger Aksan Rizvi, who mocked the idea that being unmarried for too long could lead to moral destruction. Another article, titled "My Journey from Ignorance to Guidance," is written by a Pakistani doctor and narrates her decision to shun her Western education and embrace a life of jihad. A third is a letter purporting to be from a 6-year-old boy studying at a religious seminary and TTP training ground. The boy says his brother was killed while carrying out a suicide attack in Pakistan, and that he helps his mother look after the Mujahideen as he plays with toy guns and waits for his own jihadi experience. As in, they blow up so fast, don't they? Anyway, quote, "Women are a strategic demographic because they have the ability to exert influence over their sons," Michael Kugelman, a South Asia specialist at the Woodrow Wilson Center in the United States, told the British daily The Guardian. "If women are converted to the militant cause, they can encourage their sons, or daughters for that matter, to join it as well." TTP has been using women as suicide bombers since 2010-2011, according to the Daily Times in Pakistan. However, the group's use of women has been insignificant compared to the one of the Islamic State group. The launch of Sunati Kaula indicates TTP's desire to imitate the Islamic State group by drawing more women to its cause, both as fighters and as jihadi wives. Now, isn't that progressive? Now, the reason I included this article in this episode is to get the opportunity to make the case again that using oppression argument against Islam is silly. If you really want to play sexual politics on Islam, the only way you can do it and remain accurate and not disingenuous is to say that Islam is oppressive to everyone, but has different means of achieving that for men and for women. That is to say, women have a set of obligations and rights, and men have an entirely different set of obligations and rights. Now, that's not to say that's a good thing or a bad thing, it just is. And I'm sick and tired of the well-meaning critics of Islam who decry the fate of women in Islam. Please stop doing that. Women have agency and they uphold the same retarded nonsense as the men in Islam. Now, admittedly, this is an extreme example, but take a look at the footage from Palestinian/Hamas TV. The most radical stances there are taken by women. Now, I understand that gynocentrism runs deep, but you also need to understand that compassion for Muslim women is almost always misguided. They throw you off of a rooftop just as much as the men, and they'll blow themselves up in no time if given the occasion. I mean, I'm just saying. I'd love to see the progressive take on this piece of news, because it's hard to speak on this issue whilst maintaining the crackpot theory of patriarchy and also avoid dealing with the crux of the matter, namely that Islam is cancer. Alright. Last story on the religion of pieces from Le Figaro. Cologne, 217 jihadis re-entered France. Short article. It goes like this, quote, 217 major citizens, i.e. people over the age of 18 years old, and 54 minors have entered from the combat zones in Iraq and Syria into France, says the French Minister of Interior. In an interview with Journal du Dimanche, Gérard Collomb also emphasized that these persons make the object of a systematic judicial treatment by the Paris Attorney General, who sees them to be incarcerated. He also mentioned that 7 terrorist attacks have been thwarted since the beginning of the year, a number that had already been announced. Quote, the terrorist threat remains pretty high, he said. He cites the individuals who are guided from abroad, especially by Al-Qaeda, and also the persons who have direct lines with Syria and are subjected to a very active propaganda effort. Gérard Collomb also said that the number of persons noted in the National File for Signaling and Prevention of Radicalization of Terrorist Nature has over 18,500 signals. In the same interview, the Minister of Interior announced the creation in 2018 of another 3,500 asylum centers. We also want to accelerate the process of administrative situations to allow applicants to be accommodated in existing places, he also said. And this is why France doesn't deserve anything. So you thwarted the one terrorist attack every month since the beginning of the current year. You have over 18,000 leads on potential radicals and terrorists, and also 271 known terrorists in the country. You have all of that, and you build more asylum centers. You bring in more of that. Now, how is this not lunacy? No, serious question. I mean, really, not even Sweden does that anymore. Even leftist Le Pen figure it out that it's not a fantastic idea. And I'm sorry, but at some point, the responsibility will have to be placed where it belongs, to the French voters. You voted in droves for Mélenchon and then for Macron. So at some point, this whole "the government is crap" narrative will have to also include some level of accountability. Now, I was called an extremist when I said I had no compassion for the victims of the Cologne attack, precisely because most and likely all of the victims have been voting for the left or the far left for the entirety of their lives. And now that consequences have come to bite them in the ass, literally in that case, I can't be bothered to offer sympathy. The same is true here. Although my sympathies do go with the policemen hurt in the most recent Truck of Peace attack in Paris, the police voted with the right, or the so-called far right, which is not really far right, but let's set that aside for now. The point is that the police did vote for less Islamic immigration. Too bad the majority of the country is not even as smart as the police. Anyway, let's get to other types of insanity. Back to Fox News. Planned Parenthood? Teach your preschoolers their genitals don't determine their gender. At some point, starting up the rotors will be necessary. Mark my words on that. Anyway, this article goes like this, quote, apparently, children as young as 4 are not too young to be told that gender and sex are different and that their genitals don't indicate their gender, according to new Planned Parenthood guidelines for parents. On a page of its website titled, How Do I Talk with My Preschooler About Their Body?, the abortion provider says if a child inquires why boys and girls have different bodies, a parent should introduce the concept of transgender identity. While the most simple answer is that girls have vulvas and boys have penises, the answer isn't true for every boy and girl, the organization says. Boy, girl, man, and woman are words that describe gender identity, and some people with the gender identities boys or man have vulvas, and some with the gender identity girl or woman have penises. Your genitals don't make you a boy or a girl. Parents should then point out to their child, the page continues, that genitals do not definitely establish gender and that their children can make that decision based on your values and how you plan to talk with your kid about gender as they grow up. Critics, mainly from conservative ranks, say Planned Parenthood's encouragement of parents to discuss gender identity with children who barely can string a sentence together and haven't yet learned the alphabet is preposterous. Gender is not fluid. Either you have a penis or you don't, said Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association, a Mississippi-based group that promotes conservative values. What Planned Parenthood is promoting here is just stupidity masked as sensitivity. If you're an adult and trying to talk to a child about whether they're really a boy or a girl, you're at a risk of harming them psychologically. Unless a boy or girl is exhibiting behavior or says that they're messed up about what they are, there's no reason to bring something like that up at such a young age, he said. Efforts to obtain a comment from Planned Parenthood were unsuccessful. Critics also say that Planned Parenthood's suggested talking points are misleading. Of all the things it is absurd, irresponsible, pretentious, one thing it definitely is not is scientific, New York Daily columnist S.E. Cupp wrote about the guidelines. If you do need help talking to your kids about gender and gender identity, and there is no shame in that, please use real science as a guideline and not garbage propaganda. Now, isn't it a sad state of affairs that something as sensible as, look, if your kid shows no sign of being messed up, then be happy and let nature follow its course, is now something inherently conservative? This used to have another name. It used to be called common sense, because instinctively the overwhelming majority of humans understand this to be true. First, do no harm is not exactly a new concept, and it doesn't just apply to doctors. And I love it that leftists, including and especially abortionist militants, are so concerned that children might go through religious indoctrination, but at the same time have no problem promoting a much more harmful form of indoctrination, which in my opinion is also religious in nature. In fact, it is much easier to grasp why the left is cancer once you look at it as a religion, or at the very least as a cult, rather than just another political worldview. Because it really needs to be a cult in order to attempt to be so all-encompassing as to take it upon itself to promote the transgenderist narrative on 4-year-olds by any means necessary. Because look, the writing is already on the wall. It's only a matter of time until this whole tranny nonsense will be shred to pieces. And the reason I'm confident about this is because I know where to look. Quietly, in very select scientific circles, everyone already knows the score. By 2050, we will all be looking back at this era with shock and horror. Pretty much the way we look back now on lobotomies and electroshock therapy. Or conversion therapy, for that matter. None of this has anything to do with science or compassion, because it is fundamentally uncompassionate to tell a physically healthy 4-year-old boy that he's a girl, or a physically healthy girl that she's a boy. And it is definitely uncompassionate to confuse 4-year-olds by telling them that girls can have penises. No, they can't, and they won't, and that is fine. Staying in the realm of mental disorder, coming from the Mirror, Britain's youngest sex swap patient reveals why she's undergoing surgery to switch gender for the 3rd time. Now, this is a very long article, so I've cut liberally from it. Quote, Rhea Cooper was born a boy because they became the UK's youngest sex swap patient at 15, but transitioned back to being a man at the age of 18. Not only she was born a boy, but because she has now switched gender an astonishing 3 times in her short life. Rhea, who was born Brad, became Britain's youngest sex swap patient at 15. Doctors controversially backed her belief she was a girl in a boy's body. She was given blockers to stop her going through puberty, followed by injections of female hormones to impede face and chest hair and trigger the formation of breasts. But with her life spiraling out of control as she struggled with her new identity and the fears of never being accepted as a woman, Rhea decided to transition back and live her life instead as a gay man. Before having crucial surgery, she ended her treatment and became Brad again soon after her 18th birthday. It turned her into the unwitting poster boy for those who claimed teenagers were too young to be given gender reassignment. But 5 years on, Rhea is more certain than ever that is not the real her and is making her second attempt at becoming a woman to have the future she always dreamed of. He said, I've always known I was a female. It was everyone else who was confused, not me. I was wearing makeup and heels at the age of 12. There was no question. But I felt under so much pressure from society that 6 years later I caved in. I was torn. I knew exactly who I was, but I also wanted to conform and be normal. Only now I realized that made me even more unhappy. Now I'm going to be me, and I hope I will finally be happy. Stung by critics who accused her of wasting thousands of pounds of NHS cash on her abandoned transformation, Rhea has vowed she will fund her own surgery. She has paid £5,000 to get her dream 34EE breasts and will have an op next year for her genital transformation. But as well as finally finding peace, she hopes it will allow her to find the romance and the family she longs for. Rhea said, quote, one reason I switched back to being male was because I was worried I'd never find love as Rhea. My past was always too much for men to take on board when I transitioned the first time. They'd fall in love with me, knowing my background, but as soon as their friends found out, I'd be dumped. I began to doubt I would ever feel happy again. But I'm older and wiser now and know exactly who I am. I am Rhea and I am a woman and there is no turning back. If I can find a man who accepts that and loves me for who I am, that's perfect. If not, I'd still like to be a mom. When Rhea became the youngest person in the United Kingdom to be prescribed female hormones, they placed havoc with her mental health, sending her into a spiral of self-destruction. By 18, she had twice attempted suicide. She had turned to drugs, gone through violent relationships, and to his regret, dabbled in prostitution. At rock bottom, he decided to quit the hormones and go back to being Brad. Rhea knows his treatment raises questions over whether he had been too young for gender reassignment, yet despite it, he insists this is not the case. I wasn't confused, but people around me confused me, he says. One of his biggest regrets is taking part in a Channel 4 documentary which revealed her job as a ladyboy called Lola. I was so ashamed, he said. I fell in love with the guy from the army and he even introduced me to his family. We didn't talk about my past, but they knew who I was and accepted it. Then his friends found out and that was it. It was the same pattern every time I met someone. So I decided if the only use men had for me was sex, then I'd charge them. The documentary, he says, blighted his life. Every time I met someone, they'd say, oh, you're the girl from that documentary. I couldn't get away from it. It all became too much, but I decided I would just go all the way if I became male again. But his brief spell as a boy lasted just a few months. It just felt wrong, he says. I came to the realization pretty quickly I was doing it because I wanted all the problems associated with being a tranny to go away. I was no longer able to hide who I really am, not for family or friends or potential boyfriends. I have to be true myself. Rhea, who has already changed his passport to his female identity, had his counseling and assessments as a teen at the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic in London. He says, I know some people would say it was all too much, too young, but you know your own mind. You know when you're living life in the wrong body. It's not just playing with dolls or wearing makeup. It's absolutely who you are. But life has not been easy since Rhea committed to life as a woman. She spent 6 months in a violent relationship but found it hard to walk away away. I loved him, she says simply. Could it be Rhea stuck by her abuser because she's just desperate to be loved? Maybe, he said sadly. Even finding work has been difficult. He claims he lost a care home job after they found out she was a transgender. Then they said if I left the lid up when I went to the toilet, I'd confuse the clients. It's just ridiculous. When I confronted the boss, she admitted she'd seen the documentary and didn't want me there. What can you do? Rhea now hopes to open a beauty salon for transgender people, but above all, she's desperate to have a family. I'd love a child of my own, she said. I'd love to have a baby to cuddle and love and look after as they grow up. It's not going to happen overnight, I know that, but I can dream, can't I? Now, you look me in the eyes and tell me with a straight face that this is not a basket case of mental illness run amok. Please, I'm waiting. I dare you to tell me this is just another normal person because, hey, trannyism is just normal and you're a bigot if you disagree. This guy should have been offered psychiatric help to slowly allow him to accept himself as a man. Because that's what he is. Sooner or later, the torrent of lawsuits will come, especially against the doctors who give such dangerous drugs to 15-year-olds. I mean, it's really insane. You can't legally buy a beer and a pack of cigarettes. Heck, you can't even legally have sex at age 15 in the United Kingdom, but you're somehow mature enough to decide that you're the opposite sex. This is not a conservative opinion, this is a normal human's opinion. And the progressive silence on these topics is astonishing, especially considering that even most progressives surely do understand what I'm saying and what everyone has been saying on these cases for years now. Also, those who encourage the hope and expectation in this dude to ever being a mom are by far the cruelest and meanest people on earth. No, he will never be a mom and he will never be a father either. All those hormones at such a young age have already rendered him sterile. He also won't adopt either. No sane social worker would let a child with such a deranged individual. So encouraging him that one day he'll be a mom is just cruel. Also, not telling him that he will likely never find love as a woman is also cruel. So while I always get the occasional triggered comment when I talk about these cases, it is precisely out of compassion that I oppose such practices. I don't hate this man, I pity him. I do, however, hate his parents who encouraged his delusion, and I especially hate the doctors who saw fit to experiment on his young body by giving him hard drugs at the age of 15. I also hate those who made the documentary on him. Now that was cruel in and of itself. Alright. Now, although this might exceed the 45-minute target that I always have in mind with these kinds of episodes, I really have to bring up this last article because it's just so delightful. So, coming from The Guardian. I was accused of saying all white people are racist. This is what happened next. Oh, this is really delightful to read. The author is Jason Osamide Okundaye, the president of Cambridge University Student Union's Black and Minority Ethnic Campaign. In other words, one of the most privileged, spoiled brats on the planet who happens to believe he's oppressed and thus has carte blanche on hatred against anyone, but with no consequences. So with the risk of going too long in this video, let's read. Quote, Katie Hopkins and the Mail on Sunday, quickly followed by others in the mainstream media last weekend, picked up on tweets posted on my personal social media. The headlines made allegations that I believe all individual white people are racist, insinuating that I support violence against white people because of this. The newspapers claimed that I supported specific behavior from protesters in Dalston who lit bonfires and hurled petrol bombs at officers. There were reports I believe that white people had colonized Dalston. This is supposedly all the more shocking because I am a student at Cambridge University and president of its BME campaign. The Mail on Sunday quoted a Conservative MP, Bob Blackman, who said I should be persecuted for inciting racial hatred. These papers misconstrued the meaning of my tweets and stripped them of proper context. Much focus has been placed on my claim that all white people are racist. This had been pulled out of a discussion I was having in which I addressed how racism is often portrayed as the sole preserve of the working class and has been used to further stereotypes of working class people as uneducated and brutish, which I reject. I simply meant to observe that racial prejudice, where it exists, transcends gender, class, sexuality, and age. Hence my statement that white middle class, white working class, white men, white women, white gays, white children are racist, while rhetorically hyperbolic, was a clear reference to the fact that racism is not an exclusive characteristic of any one demographic. My experiences as a black gay man facing racism from white gay men have taught me this. Who the fuck do you think you're talking about, you blathering fool? So, you wanted to say that racism is not an exclusive characteristic of any one demographic, but somehow you actually said exactly that racism is an exclusive characteristic of white people. And we're supposed to feel sorry for your disdainful lot? Really? No, I actually think you've been treated much more kinder than you deserve. Why don't these people come to the intermarium to spout nonsense like this? I'd be glad to show them around how we treat his kind here. Not because he's black, mind you, but because he's a cunt. And cunts deserve to be treated like any other cunt. Going further with the article, quote, Cambridgeshire police swiftly dropped an investigation because they clearly saw what the press decided to ignore, that in no sense was this an incitement of racial hatred. No news organization that ran my story sought to clarify what my comments actually meant before publishing, close quote. I'm actually glad that the police dropped the investigation, not because I think you're not guilty. No, you definitely are guilty as fuck of inciting racial hatred. It's just that I don't believe those laws should exist. Now, only if we could have the same standard for white people too. Now that would be awesome. And as I explained in the Freedom of Association video, that can only be achieved by making an example of sorry lots like this one. On the other hand, I am thrilled that no news organization sought to clarify your comments because they don't deserve that. They're very clear and we can all read the English language, thank you very much. Besides, you accused white Britons of colonizing Dalston, and you seem to still not being able to realize how retarded that is. Which to me suggests that the only reason you're at Cambridge is because of the color of your skin and most definitely not because of your brains. But then again, Oxford. But then again, considering Oxford is the place which legitimately claims that not making eye contact is racist, maybe this is the new normal at the formerly esteemed institution of higher learning. Anyway, let's read further. Quote, newspapers decided to use a picture of me where I was frowning, perhaps playing into a repetitive media stereotype of the aggressive black man. Well, you are an aggressive black man, so what exactly is the problem? You're a militant racist who upholds violence against other people based on their race. And you are black, so an aggressive black man. What exactly is the issue? Quote, I was also reported as Cambridge's head of equality rather than an elected president of a campaign that advocates for the specific liberation issues of students of color. The discussion mentioned was tweeted separately to others in support of Dalston protesters, which reflected my continued support of those who seek justice in the face of inequality and in some cases brutality. Oh, fuck you with a 10-foot pole. And frankly, I sympathize with the media thinking you are the head of equality because A, most retarded nonsense like your own tends to come from that corner of any university, and B, the media mistakenly assume that generally students at such esteemed institutions are far more sensible and smart not to elect a militant racist like yourself for anything. Yes, the media was wrong, but I understand why. Anyway, let's skip a bit and go straight to where he whines. Those are the delicious tears. Quote, The events of last weekend have led to significant personal consequences for myself and my family. I have received death threats, rape threats, and racist insults. My family, and especially my mother, is still dealing with the recent death of my father and have now had to face journalists doorstepping and harassing us. Some of these encounters with journalists have led to fictitious comments stated to have come from my mother and even a report of me being smacked. I was attacked as homophobic because of my observation that racism does exist in gay spaces, as has recently been explored in an episode of Queer Britain on BBC Three. To defend myself against such accusations, I'm having to come out in the national media as a gay man in full knowledge this had been information I had not yet chosen to disclose to relatives. Boo fucking who? Here's the thing. No sympathy whatsoever for the death threats and rape threats and whatever. None. You had no sympathy when you publicly upheld racially motivated violence against people who've done nothing wrong to you. So why should any normal person give two hoots over how traumatic your existence was in getting some consequences inflicted upon you for your consciously chosen behavior? Because you chose and still do choose to be a militant racist nutjob. And I'm sorry, but in the current year, militant racists tend to get nasty comments online. Tough luck. But then he goes into full hypocrisy mode. Quote, "The press often attacks members of the public, often with character attacks on students of color, as they believe that such people are unable to defend themselves. They are aware that this has an intimidating effect on other people who see the treatment and public takedown of those who are outspoken or politically active in ways the paper may disapprove of. Such attacks attempt to clamp down on the free speech of minorities and silence dissent. Tactics include distorting words and insinuating what cannot be proved, as well as publishing personal information and private, embarrassing, or unflattering photographs." What, you mean like what the media did to millennial woos? I'm sure you and your violent gang of militant racists applauded like the seals back when it happened to woos, which is precisely why I'm thrilled to see your own tactics used against you. In fact, I hope a lot more of this happens. I'd like to see a leftist a day doxed in the tabloids with their full quotes on display for everyone. Why? Because y'all totally deserve it. I mean, heck, Millennial Woos had his life turned upside down for a lot less than this, and also had no chance of defending himself in the pages of The Guardian, so please, spare me with the whining. And yes, these tactics do have an intimidating effect, which is why I hope to see a lot more of this used on you and your sorry lot of militant racists. Hopefully you'll get intimidated enough to go back to Nigeria or wherever you're originally from. At least there you won't be having white Britons colonizing your black space. And here's where it gets funny. Quote, "Finding ordinary members of the public whom they have selected for attack or ridicule is a core part of the press's modus operandi. The advantage of picking on relatively unknown people like myself is that our attitudes and actions can be selectively and misleadingly described with little fear that we have the public profile to fight back in the media or the money to challenge them in courts." Now look it, you can't have it both ways. You can't be an elected official of one of the most prestigious universities in the world and at the same time play the "oh, but I'm just an ordinary member of the public" card. It doesn't work that way. If you had been a clerk at a supermarket, then yes, you would have had a reasonable case that you were unknown and the small fish and the media were unreasonable to pick on you. But that's not the case. You're representing Oxford. You were elected for that. So as a result, this comes with greater power and yes, greater responsibility. You don't like it? Resign your position, pack your bags, and go back to being an ordinary member of the public, preferably in your country of origin. This is a systemic problem with leftists of any stripe. They seem to lack the mental capacity of fathoming the concept of accountability. And I've gotten a lot worse than this guy since 2005 when I started to write and then podcasts and then this channel. Ever heard of me complaining about it? No, because I know that this comes with the territory. It doesn't matter whether I deserve it or not, it just is what it is. If you want to have opinions, you have to accept that others will have them too. Anyway, last paragraph, quote, "The events of last weekend have highlighted the dangers of speaking out, but more significantly the importance of speaking up for social justice, particularly from the perspective of a minority. Freedom of speech is viewed as a core value of British society, and this must extend to instances where it is criticized or called in for scrutiny. Without challenge and diversity of thought, there can be no progress." Oh, the irony. Now, while I genuinely believe that civilization will be better off without your particular diversity of thought, and I mean it, everyone would objectively be better off without the disdainful militant racism like these authors. But whilst I believe that, it is true that there can be no progress without diversity of thought. The problem is that this author should apply it to himself, because his diversity of thought has been totally normative virtually everywhere. And it is his diversity of thought that needs to be criticized, called in for scrutiny, and I would add, mocked mercilessly. It is people like this one that I would put on my list of loony leftists. I would have to have the resources to run an organization. I would really love it to have the resources to run an organization like SPLC that would hunt down this individual for at least a decade. Every time he tries to get employment anywhere, a torrent of letters, emails, and phone calls to arrive at that employer, letting the employer know that this is a militant racist that is unsafe for customers, particularly white customers. And if the employer doesn't heed, then have that employer's image purposely associated mercilessly with the face and the opinions of this disdainful helicopterable. Rinse and repeat for decades. Because until serious consequences are inflicted upon these people, they will never stop. But if serious consequences do come, via market means, mind you, the government should just stay the hell out of this, then the next generation will learn that being a militant, violent racist is not only morally bad, but also bad for business. And that's pretty much all I had to say for this episode. It was a bit longer than standard episodes, but I had to include this practical politics segment at the end because accountability matters, and we shouldn't rely on the state for this because hate speech laws are insane and counterproductive. We should really rely on the market for this because all we need is the will, and these schmucks can be made history. Do unto them what they've been doing to normal people until recently. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. And I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.